Welcome to today's event commemorating the 10-year anniversary of the March 11th triple disaster in Japan. I am Laura Winthrop Abbott, Executive Vice President of the U.S.-Japan Council, and I'll serve as your MC today. The U.S.-Japan Council is a nonprofit dedicated to strengthening ties between the United States and Japan by building a community of leaders across cultures, sectors, and generations. The theme of our commemoration is looking back, looking forward. We're honored to be joined by leaders in the United States and Japan from government, nonprofits, and other organizations who will share their experiences on and after March 11th and their perspectives 10 years later, along with their thoughts for the future. On March 11th, 2011, the Great East Japan earthquake triggered a massive tsunami that devastated coastal towns across the Tohoku region and resulted in a terrifying crisis at the Daiichi nuclear power plant in Fukushima. A decade later, we pause to reflect and remember. We remember those 20,000 people confirmed dead or missing, and the many others who were injured, and the families and friends who were left behind. We pause to remember the brave men and women who helped in the relief, rescue, and recovery efforts in villages up and down the coast and in Fukushima. We pause to remember the resilient people of Tohoku who have been rebuilding their lives, communities, and livelihoods over the last decade. We pause to remember that the work is not done. While the events occurred 10 years ago, the pain and recovery is still ongoing for tens of thousands who lost family members, homes, jobs, and entire hometowns. Finally, we pause to honor the friendship between our two countries. Please join me as we pause and reflect and observe a moment of silence. Thank you. Today is March 10th in the United States and March 11th in Japan. I'm sure many of you remember exactly where you were 10 years ago when the earthquake struck at 2:46 p.m. Japan time. I was on the 25th floor of an apartment building in Tokyo, having just moved to Japan 6 weeks before. Once the intense shaking subsided and we safely evacuated down to the parking lot outside the swaying skyscrapers, we began to think and hope that the worst had passed. It was then that the terrible images of the tsunami began to appear on people's news feeds and on their phones. We had no idea then about the magnitude of the loss of life and property, and how the disasters would forever alter the future for so many people in Tohoku and beyond. After the earthquake, I traveled to Tohoku with a couple of leaders from All Hands Volunteers, a nonprofit now called All Hands and Hearts, to determine how volunteers from other countries might lend a hand to help the devastated communities. We spent our days volunteering and our nights sleeping on the floor in overflow space in an evacuation center. Later, I had the opportunity to travel to Tohoku on several occasions with Ambassador Roos, our US ambassador to Japan at the time, and to visit local leaders to ask how people in the United States could help. I also personally became involved in supporting the recovery by spending the next 5 years as the founding executive director of the Tomodachi Initiative, which was established by Ambassador Roos and USJC's founding president, Irene Hirano Inoue, to give hope to young people in Tohoku. The experience of collaborating in the aftermath of the disaster, including the American and Japanese militaries coming together for Operation Tomodachi, deepened the close partnership between the United States and Japan and strengthened the bonds between many individual Americans and Japanese. That support for the US-Japan relationship endures to this day, and we are proud that the US-Japan Council and our Tomodachi Initiative have been able to partner with the many other organizations to make this event possible today. We'd like to acknowledge the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo and the Embassy of Japan in the United States, as well as these important collaborators listed on this slide. It is truly an honor to come together for our friends, our Tomodachi in Japan. And now I'd like to introduce our first two speakers. First is Joe Young, Chargé d'Affaires ad interim at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, serving as the senior representative of the United States government in Japan. Following Joe's remarks, we are honored to hear from Japan's new ambassador to the United States, Koji Tomita, who took office earlier this year. Now let's hear from Joe Young.
Hello, I'm Joe Young, Chargé d'Affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. Today we commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Great East Japan Earthquake. We join the Japanese people in solemn remembrance of all who were lost in the tragedy and strive to honor their memory through support of the ongoing recovery efforts, as well as other initiatives to build a stronger U.S.-Japan partnership and a brighter future. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, I was honored to work closely with the government of Japan and U.S. Forces Japan in assisting with relief efforts that would become Operation Tomodachi. This undertaking remains the largest ever bilateral military operation between our countries and is emblematic of the good we accomplish through the U.S.-Japan alliance. I'm also very grateful to have had the opportunity to work with the U.S.-Japan Council to keep that same spirit of cooperation alive. In the decade since the disaster, the U.S.-Japan Council and our embassy have worked together through the Tomodachi Initiative to nurture the next generation of Japanese and American leaders. To date, the initiative has touched the lives of over 10,000 young individuals, ensuring the strength of our bilateral relationship for the future. Even as we somberly remember the events of March 11, 2011, and the many who were lost, I take great comfort in knowing we have strong partners and allies like the U.S.-Japan Council committed to building an ever stronger and ever deeper friendship between the United States and Japan.
My fellow ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, when the earthquake hit, I was working in Tokyo as Deputy Director General of the North American Bureau. I saw things moving on my desk. I saw the concern on people's faces. And I soon saw something else. I saw that all the shaking, the swaying, the distraction did not weaken the foundation of U.S.-Japan friendship. It did just the opposite. Ours is an unshakable friendship, unshakable from earthquakes, and unshakable because of the values that hold us together. I saw this friendship with my own eyes. At the Bureau, we immediately began working with our U.S. colleagues. I saw all the support that the U.S. sent. It was a moving thing to witness all the service members, the aircraft, ships, the disaster aid coming together in this arsenal of friendship. That August, I accompanied then Vice President Biden to Sendai, where I saw him console the victims and give them hope. 10 years later, we Japanese remember Americans' cooperation with profound gratitude. The U.S. response was built on the Japan-U.S. alliance and on the grassroots connection between our two countries, such as the U.S.-Japan Council. I'd like to express my deepest respect to all the former ambassadors who have worked to strengthen the alliance. You were on those ships, those helicopters, those rescue parties, and I thank you. Lastly, I thank the USJC for its many contributions, including this symposium, and I thank all of you for attending. My best wishes to you all.
Thank you, Chargé d'Affaires Joe Young and Ambassador Tomita. Next, we've invited two mayors from Tohoku who've been leading their communities for 10 years through the disaster and reconstruction. First is Mayor Jin Sato from Minami Sanriku. Then we'll hear from Mayor Futoshi Toba from Rikusen Takata. In June 2011, Ambassador Roos and a few others accompanying him, including myself, had the opportunity to visit Mayor Toba in his temporary headquarters office as Rikusen Takata's city hall had been destroyed by the tsunami. I remember later traveling to Minami Sanriku on a trip with Ambassador Kennedy in November 2013 and seeing how that town was rebuilding. It is a testament to both these two leaders that their cities have recovered and rebuilt so well from this devastating time. Now, let's hear from Mayor Sato and Mayor Toba.
こんにちは。宮城県南三陸町長の佐藤仁です。震災からまもなく10年が経過をいたします。アメリカの皆さん方には被災した南三陸町に対しまして大変心温まるご支援を賜りましたこと、心から厚く御礼を申し上げたいと思います。南三陸町は津波で二度と命を失わない町を作ろうと、そういう思いで高台移転を目指して復興事業を進めてまいりましたが、それも全て完了いたしました。本当に安全安心な町を手に入れることができました。震災直後、米軍の友達作戦で私どもの町は大変お世話になりました。半島部が道路が被災いたしまして、その半島部の皆さん孤立をしてしまいましたが、そちらの方に米軍の皆さん方が資材をお届けいただいて、大変地域住民を助けていただきました。また、キャロライン・ケネディ大使が赴任直後に南三陸町にお越しをいただいて、仮設の住宅でお住まいの皆さん方に大変な激励を賜りました。あの時の地域住民の皆さん方の感激の表情はいまだに忘れることができません。その後もケネディ大使にはツールド東北でこの被災地を自転車で回っていただきまして、南三陸町にも必ず寄っていただいて我々に激励をしていただきました。そういったたくさんの思いを我々にお届けをいただいたアメリカの皆様方に心から感謝を申し上げさせていただきます。本当にありがとうございました。
米日カウンシルの皆さん、こんにちは。陸前高田市長の鳥羽太でございます。東日本大震災から10年を迎えることとなりました。アメリカの皆様方には本当に心温まるご支援を賜ってまいりました。この場をお借りして心から感謝を申し上げます。当時、ルース大使にお会いをさせていただいて、ルースさんからアメリカはどんな支援をすればいいんだというようなお話をいただきました。私は自分の経験をもとに即座に子どもたちにアメリカを見せてあげてほしい、希望を感じさせてほしい、そのようにお話をさせていただきました。実際に日本からアメリカに子どもたちを招待するということはたくさんのお金がかかることであります。米日カウンシルの皆様方にはそこのところを本当に動いていただいて、おかげさまで私の息子もそのプロジェクトに参加をさせていただきましたが、今では大学に通っているわけでございます。そんな子どもたちがたくさん日本にはいるわけです。復興はあと一歩というところでありますが、市民の生活はほぼ昔の通りに戻ってまいりました。これからも皆様方からの温かいご支援に対し忘れることなく、しっかりとこの陸前高田の町を復興させて発展させてまいります。どうぞこれからも末永いご支援、そして末永いお付き合いを心からお願いを申し上げまして、簡単ではありますが一言御礼のご挨拶とさせていただきます。本当にありがとうございました。
Thank you, Mayor Sato and Mayor Toba. I'd now like to hand it over to Karen Kelly, our moderator for our first panel. Karen was a press attaché in March 2011 at the US Embassy in Tokyo. Communication was so important, with over 150,000 American citizens in Japan dealing with the uncertainty following March 11th, especially with regard to the nuclear plant crisis in Fukushima. Karen was a key part in working round the clock to take care of American citizens living in Japan. Karen is a senior Foreign Service officer and is now the senior advisor for diversity and inclusion in the East Asia Bureau of the Department of State. Karen, I'll pass to you now to introduce our distinguished panel of guests.
Ambassador Roos, Ambassador Fujisaki, thank you for this opportunity to have a conversation looking back 10 years ago. On that fateful day, you were both executive leaders for our two important diplomatic missions in Washington, D.C. and in Tokyo. Ambassador Roos, as the U.S. ambassador in Japan during the disaster, what are some of your most striking memories of leading the U.S. mission through that disaster?
Well, first of all, Karen, thank you for being by my side and your incredible leadership during that period of time. And let me just say, my thoughts and prayers are with the people of Tohoku, and particularly those families who lost loved ones, as well as the families of two Americans that died on March 11th. You know, like everyone else, I have distinct memories of the fateful day of March 11th. I was in my office on the 9th floor of the embassy with my senior staff when the earthquake hit. And it obviously built up in intensity over about a 6-minute period of time, which seemed like an eternity. And we thought the embassy was going to collapse, and quite frankly, we were not going to survive. But thankfully we did. We evacuated the embassy, and out in the parking lot, we began to get a sense of the challenge that laid ahead of us. We immediately called the State Department Operations Center to advise Secretary Clinton, the White House to advise the President of the United States, Obama. I had a conversation with the the General of U.S. Forces Japan, Burt Field. We began to see on the cell phones the images of the tsunami that was developing. And then several minutes later, one of our Japanese staff in the embassy came up to me and said she had just talked to Ministry of Defense and a nuclear crisis or nuclear situation was developing. At that point in time, and for the days and hours, days and months that followed, as one senior member of the White House staff said, all of the pressure streams seemed to converge on the U.S. ambassador's office. That was coordination with the government of Japan. We were coordinating with the U.S. government in Washington, D.C., calling for resources to help not only on search and rescue missions for U.S. Citizens, but as Japanese citizens as well. We were dealing with the American citizens in Japan. There were 150,000 of those citizens. We were dealing with the embassy and the families of the embassy, the U.S. military and the dependents of the U.S. military, and we launched Operation Tomodachi. And even other countries began to reach out to the ambassador's office because they were seeking information and trying to decide what they were going to do to confront with the crisis. So many memories during that period of time, both good and bad. There were some sobering conversations that I had, Karen, that were quite something. I had a senior member of the White House staff say that there was a 50% chance that within 24 hours of when he made this statement, the Fukushima situation could turn into a Chernobyl or even worse than a Chernobyl. I had a Navy nuclear reactor senior military official say that there was a possibility that Tokyo could become a contaminated wasteland. Obviously, a very sobering statement. My nuclear expert who came to the embassy said we were on uncharted territory and things could get worse and probably were. So all of these things were converging on the embassy at the same time. And my responsibility, I always kept at the front of my mind, was twofold. Number one, to ensure the health and safety of Americans. And number two, to strengthen the relationship between Japan and the United States, something that had built up into an incredible relationship of trust and friendship since the last tragedy that Japan had faced of this magnitude, World War II. What really sticks in my mind, though, is the human elements of the tragedy that took place during this period of time. I remember 12 days into the crisis, I traveled with my team as well as Admiral Willard, the head of Pacific Command, and we went to the Tohoku region. We took a helicopter tour, and the amount of devastation was something I had never seen in my life, and obviously hope to never see again. But if I could just share one story and then I'll stop. We went to a couple of cities that had been devastated by the tsunami. One was Ishinomaki. And I walked into one of the evacuation centers at the time. And I think a young kid who was 10 or 12 years old then, he must be in his early 20s now. As I was addressing the evacuees, I think he could tell I was a little shaken up. And after all he had gone through, this young kid came up to me and put his arms around me and gave me a hug and made me feel that much better. And just to this day, I think of the young people in the Tohoku, and I think of all of the people there and the incredible strength, resilience, and we hear story after story. And I'm just proud that I, along with my colleagues, could play a tiny part in helping the Japanese through that incredible crisis of March 11th.
Thank you. That was very intense time. I recall very well. Ambassador Fujisaki, you were the senior leader in the Japanese government in Washington, D.C. Can you tell me what were your biggest challenges and recollections of the crisis at that time?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, USJC, for having me. This 3/11 was the biggest challenge I had in my over 40 years of diplomatic life. I have three roles as ambassador in Washington, D.C. One was a channel between U.S. government and Japanese government. The main channel was in Tokyo, but as all the headquarters are in Washington, D.C., we work together with Tokyo. And for example, in White House, John Holdren organized a teleconference with the top 13 physicists in the United States and reported to the president and also told us how they see the event is. Kurt Campbell, I met him several times a day, and he organized 24/17 in state, Department of State. They stayed in office all day, including as if it was their disaster. And Dan Poneman in the Energy Department, and also many generals and admirals in DOD, they took my phone even in the midnight, and we were able to communicate. And I wanted Japanese people to know that it's whole U.S. government, Tokyo, but also in Washington and everywhere, Hawaii, they all got together to help us. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I was appearing on television, national network, to explain about the situation in Japan and Fukushima. it was not easy because Tokyo didn't provide us with much information at the time, but I had to appear. And my embassy staff, I was relying on them because they collected information and provided me individually. But still, it was not easy because, as you know, in US television, they don't have rehearsals. For example, if
Right.
I appear on CNN Wolf Blitzer, I would speak for promised 5 minutes and I was going to leave, and Wolf would say, "Ambassador, can you stay on for 5 more minutes?" And I said, yes. And then he would call his correspondent in Fukushima and ask her how the situation is. And she would say, there's a rumor that the reactor is melting down. And then he would turn to me, "You didn't say about this possibility. What do you think, Ambassador?" And
Right on the spot.
If I made any wrong statement, that would make a huge issue. So, but this was a very difficult, but also a memorable event. The third thing was I was going around colleges, schools, churches, meeting people, Red Cross, and all to thank their dedication, their donation, because we were showered by origami cranes, flowers, money as well. It's not only amount of money. We received the biggest amount from the United States, but for example, a little kid was coming to me, giving me a $20 bill saying that this is my birthday gift I got from my father. I wanted to pass on to people in Japan, and that was really moving.
Very
And,
touching.
I thought that this was the biggest disaster after World War II. And this shouldn't have happened. And we were helped by people around the world, but we were lucky, fortunate, that US was our ally and standing by us at the most difficult time in our history. And so I would like all my Japanese friends to remember that we were so much helped by these people in United States, back in United States, as well as in Tokyo. And without their help, we are not here now.
Thank you, Ambassador Fujisaki. It was a spontaneous outpouring, as I recall, of concern and care by the American people at the news of the disaster. I'd like to take you both in a different direction, if I could, and look at two positive initiatives that came out of the March 11 disaster. Ambassador Roos, we've already mentioned it a little bit, but the Tomodachi Initiative was an effort that emerged almost literally from the ashes of the March 11 disaster. How did that come about? And what did you hope to achieve by establishing a youth-oriented exchange program?
Well, the way the Tomodachi Initiative came about, as I mentioned, I had made with my team trips to the Tohoku region. And on one of the trips that we made, we stopped by Rikuzen Takada. We just heard from Mayor Toba, and I had a conversation. We had a meeting with Mayor Toba. And at that time, I said to him, what can the United States do to help? You know, the Operation Tomodachi had come to an end, and the US was pulling back some of its resources, which was only natural at that period of time. But we were looking towards the future. And Mayor Toba asked to think about it, and came to our office in the embassy, and Suzanne Basala, who is now the CEO of US-Japan Council, and our other senior staff were there. And Mayor Toba said to me at the time, you know, our government needs to support us on rebuilding the schools, the hospitals, the houses. But what you could do is, what the United States could do is provide hope to the young people of Japan. And we always believed that people-to-people connections between our two countries were critical to the future of our relationship. So our team just started brainstorming, and we came up with the idea of hopefully providing hope to the young people of the Tohoku region by connecting them with the young people of the United States. And there was, as Ambassador Fujisaki said, there was an incredible outpouring at that time of people and corporations and governments that just wanted to do something. And so I come from the Silicon Valley, have that entrepreneurial spirit. And so we decided after brainstorming to create this Tomodachi initiative. And through people like Suzanne Basala, the US-Japan Council, and Laura Abbott. But most importantly at the time, Irene Hirano Inoue, who is the head of the US-Japan Council. We were looking for a private sector partner, and we had been impressed with what the US-Japan Council and Irene Hirano had accomplished. So we asked them to be our partner, and the rest is history.
It was a wonderful initiative.
Yeah, so many of us are so proud. I think Joe Young indicated there's been 10,000 participants. There's been 300 programs. It's still going strong. We still need support from everyone on this Zoom call today. But it's something that we hope to have created a Tomodachi generation that will bridge the people-to-people connections between our two countries for years and decades to come.
Thank you. Ambassador Fujisaki, I'd like to ask you about the Taylor Anderson Memorial Fund, named after Miss Anderson, who was the jet teaching assistant who lost her life in the March 11 disaster.
Thank you, Karen. There were two jets who lost their life, Monty Dixon of Alaska and Taylor Anderson of Virginia. Taylor was a 24-year-old girl who wanted to become a bridge between Japan and the United States by becoming an English language teacher. And she came to Ishinomaki area in Tohoku. And in her third year, she met tsunami. And after saving all the children evacuation, she went back to her home, and on the way, she met tsunami and swept away, lost her life. As she really loved books and she wanted to become a bridge between US and Japan, father and mother thought they should keep on carrying the torch for her daughter as well. And they started donating books, English language books to schools, and also start student exchanges. In order for that purpose, we made a Taylor Anderson Fund. Andy Anderson, her father, and I became the co-chair, and we have already given 22 schools these reading corners, and also having high school student exchanges and college student exchanges. These college student exchanges are made possible with the assistance of Tomodachi. They are financially helping this. So we are very grateful. The Taylor Anderson Foundation fund is very grateful to Tomodachi. And one thing I'd like to say is that I was there in Monday and Tuesday this week to give to be in a ceremony for donation of reading corners, and landscape was totally changed. Land was raised, and there was a big concrete stone walls to stop tsunami, and it's all changed. But still, at 8:30 in the morning on Tuesday, we had an earthquake. It was magnitude 4.0. And we were told, of course, it's smaller than what it was 10 years ago. That was magnitude 8 and 9. But this one, we were told, was still aftershock of the big one 10 years ago. So it's still going on. It's not the past. So the earth is warning us that don't forget to. And so this is a very important event, to commemorate. But we also have to remember that things could happen and we have to be all prepared as well. Thank you very much for this occasion.
Thank you, Ambassador Fujisaki, and thank you, Ambassador Roos, for that introspective look on the March 11 disaster. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to our Bendi speaker, Ryota Kono, who is an alumni of the Tomodachi Initiative Exchange Program from Fukushima. Ryota, the floor is yours.
東日本大震災、当時高校1年生で15歳だった私は陸上競技に力を注ぐ学生で毎日のように町内を走り回っていました。2011年の3月11日、いつものように高校に行って練習をしようとしていた時に地震が起こりました。これまで経験したことのない揺れにだんだんと緊張が張り詰めたのを覚えています。家に帰るといろんなものが倒れていて電気が使えない中で片付けをして一晩を過ごしました。私が住んでいた浪江町は原子力発電所から 10km の範囲内にあり、翌日には避難をすることになりました。避難先で新しく高校生活が始まり、生活にも慣れて落ち着いてくると毎日のように流れてくる震災関連のニュースを見て、自分も震災復興のために何かをできないか、町のために貢献したいという思いが込み上げてきました。しかし当時の高校2年生の自分ではボランティアに行く手段もなく、自身の無力さを痛感しました。その時に出会ったのが友達プログラムでした。東北の次世代のリーダーを育成するという趣旨のプログラムに直感的にこれなら自分も参加できるし復興につながるのではないかと感じたことを覚えています。友達の経験で一番印象にあるのが当時の米国上院議員のダニエル・イノウエ氏とお会いし、義務と名誉の話を聞いたことです。ダニエル・イノウエ氏は日系人という背景を持ち、太平洋戦争の際に迫害されるも米国に忠誠を誓い、自ら米軍へ志願し、片腕を失いながらも戦い功績を収め、自身の米国人としての義務を全うし、日本人としての名誉を守った方です。そのプログラム参加後も友達アラムナイとしてたくさんの機会に参加させていただきました。さまざまな経験をする中で同じ東北出身のアラムナイと出会い、考えや思いを共有することでより地元復興への思いが強くなっていきました。友達での経験がより地元に戻る後押しになったと言っても過言ではないと思います。友達プログラムで聞いたダニエル・イノウエ氏の言葉が一人の浪江町民としての義務を芽生えさせ、友達プログラムが地元に貢献していく力を養ってくれました。そして現在ここ浪江町の職員として働いております。10年前は地元のために何もできない自分の無力さに苦しんでいた高校生でしたが、やっと自分の義務を果たせるスタートラインに立つことができました。浪江町は震災以前2万人が住んでおり、一度原子力発電所の影響で0人になりましたが、現在1400人が暮らす町になりました。若い人は少ないですが、同じく友達プログラムに参加したアラムナイの一人が自分と同じように地元に戻り、地域の人が集まることのできる場を提供しています。彼といつもどのようにこれからの浪江町を復興させていけるか話しています。これからも友達世代の一人として友達プログラムを通して培ってきた経験を生かし、心強いコミュニティの仲間と共に地元復興に取り組んでいきたいと思います。
Thank you, Ryota. Your dedication to your hometown is truly inspiring. I'd now like to introduce Joshua Walker, President of the Japan Society, to speak about the efforts of the community of U.S.-Japan related organizations to assist Japan following 3/11. Joshua, please take it away.
Konnichiwa. I'm Joshua Walker, President and CEO of Japan Society here in New York. I'm honored to be joining this program today with the U.S.-Japan Council and the other participating organizations in the U.S.-Japan community to reflect on how the American people and nonprofit organizations specifically came together in support of Japan after March 11th. Every Japanese and friend of Japan knows exactly where they were on March 11th, 2011. For me, it was Friday morning in Florida, where I'd come to celebrate my 30th birthday with my brother and friends when the images of the tidal waves and destruction awoke me. I immediately tried to reach my missionary parents serving, who I knew would be in harm's way, only to get the disconnected and busy ringtones that many of us received that day, as I hadn't heard and didn't hear for 24 hours, as I assumed the worst, as many around the world did, as we watched on in terror. In the aftermath of March 11th, it was not only the U.S. government and the military that demonstrated the strength and resolve of the U.S.-Japan relations. It was the U.S. non-governmental sector and its own people that responded with enormous goodwill. U.S. private donations reached close to $750 million, according to a survey done by the Japan Center for International Exchange. This ranks the 5th largest in U.S. history of donations for disasters, following Hurricane Katrina, the 9/11 attacks, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, and the 2010 Haiti earthquake. In the U.S. nonprofit sector, 48 organizations raised over $1 million each, and at least 136 organizations collected more than $100,000. These included Japan-related organizations, 38 Japan-American societies across the country, as well as organizations focusing on U.S.-Japan exchanges. Here in New York, the Japan Society established the Japan Earthquake Relief Fund on the day after March 11th. We received more than $14 million from over 24,600 individuals, which came from all 50 states, in addition to 55 countries around the world. These donations initially went toward immediate relief and reconstruction efforts, and later toward projects assisting Tohoku's mid- and long-term recovery. Tonight, we honor that spirit of generosity of all the people and donors who gave their support to Tohoku and Japan's recovery. And as the U.S.-Japan community comes together again 10 years later, we commemorate and we would like to remember the leadership and solidarity that Japan-related organizations in the United States showed after 3/11 in support of Japan. At the end of this program, many of these American organizations that care about Japan and U.S.-Japan relations will join us in sending their thoughts and prayers. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you, Joshua. After this important look back, it's now my privilege to introduce two other leaders of the U.S.-Japan relationship to co-moderate our next panel, focusing on a look forward. Paige Cottingham Streeter is the Secretary General of U.S. Colcon Panel and Executive Director of the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission. Frank Januzzi is President and CEO of the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation. I'd now like to turn it over to Paige and Frank for a panel discussion with 4 former ambassadors from the United States and Japan. Over to you.
Thank you, Laura. It's an honor for Frank and me to be with you this evening. We're delighted to be a part of this important program. As others have said, it seems like it was just yesterday when we were shocked by the news about the devastating events happening on March 11th. And now here we are 10 years later with this opportunity to think back and to acknowledge the change that's occurred in Japan, but also look forward and consider the lessons learned from those years in between. I'm honored and delighted to invite this evening a panel of distinguished guests. We have an opportunity for a 30-minute conversation, much too brief, but it will in fact be important, I know, to be able to unearth and consider ways that we can learn from the past and consider the future of the U.S.-Japan relationship. We have this evening former ambassadors Sesai, Sugiyama, Kennedy, and Schieffer. Frank and I will ask each of them 2 questions, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to hear their thoughts and reflections. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through individual biographies. I think our panelists are certainly well known and well respected and appreciate their public service. I'd like to begin with Ambassador Kennedy, if I may. and pose the first question. In fact, in the last 10 years since March 11th, and we've heard from some of the Tomodachi Fellows and others, there's been a proliferation of exchanges, both educational and cultural, that have sprung up to engage Americans and Japanese with each other on all varieties of topics and issues and levels of society. I'm wondering if you have considered and thought about any particular lessons learned from the events associated with March 11th, and then more specifically, what the impact has been on education and the role that educational institutions may play as we look forward to the future of the US-Japan partnership.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me and for convening this panel. It's wonderful to see so many people that I worked with and some friends from Japan and the United States as we mark this solemn anniversary. I think the crisis, this Fukushima Tohoku disaster really showed us how much we need each other in Japan and the United States, what friendship really means on a personal level as well as on a national level. And I think it was a chance for those bonds to be reaffirmed and strengthened in ways that will allow us to move forward together, which is becoming more and more important. As we see now in the world, it takes governments to solve our common problems, and whether those are climate change or global health pandemic. And I think that Japan and the United States, through the kind of cooperation that they exercised in 3/11, have really developed a way of doing that and an understanding. And I think that if we want to sustain the benefits that our alliance brings to each of our countries and each of our peoples, education and paying it forward to the next generation is really something that we have to take very seriously, because there aren't as many students going back and forth as there once were, and it's quite difficult and expensive for them to do so. So I think we need to really, this group and other people in positions of leadership need to continue to try very hard and increase our efforts to make that easier for students, to make it more fun, to meet them where they are, to celebrate what it is about Japan that Americans find so endlessly fascinating and compelling, and for Japan to help give their students confidence in their English and in their ability to go abroad that will make their lives richer and more rewarding by studying in the United States. So I think that education is a real area that we need to recognize its importance within the national security context as well. And I'm glad to see that both education efforts and economic cooperation of different kinds and new kinds, whether it's in AI or digital currency or all kinds of things like that, are really great opportunities for the entrepreneurial energy of the US and Japan to be celebrated and work together.
Thank you so much. And I think I'd like to just ask a follow-up question in that vein. You were talking about the varieties of topics and issues. And one of the things that we've been finding is that, in fact, there are students in the US who are interested in Japan, but they have different majors, and the same is the case in Japan. And so I guess I wonder what message, if we have any young people on the call, that you might offer them in terms of whether they should pursue their passion in Japan, even if they're an engineering major, for example.
Well, I think actually, absolutely. And they will learn so much more by studying in another country and being immersed in another way of looking at things and another way of solving problems. And it will increase their ability to do that as they move throughout their career. So it's a tremendous benefit, even if it doesn't seem a direct one, to study and live in another country. And I think it's incumbent upon the adults to make the credits easier. Engineering is a great example because the curriculums are mostly in English, but the calendars, the credits, no one knows this better than you, Paige. There's still a lot of ways that we could facilitate this and build upon the real interest in short-term travel by encouraging people in science and engineering and technology to be able to study in each other's countries and at each other's institutions, as well as more historically underserved communities, HBCUs and other institutions that historically haven't been able to participate in international travel. And they're also very interested and have so much to teach and learn from their counterparts in other countries. And we can also do a lot of things through technology now that we couldn't. We can do education before people go, when they come back. So it's not just even for the short-term people. It's not just a short immersion. This can be really, we can build continuity into this in a way that helps students get more out of it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I'm going to move on to Ambassador Sasai. Ambassador Sasai, you were at the U.S. Embassy, at the Japanese Embassy in the United States over a period of time that also saw some leadership change. And in the 10 years since the March 11th events, we've seen leadership change in both Japan and the United States. So my question to you is, how can non-governmental organizations play a role in providing that stability and that continuity and support for the US-Japan relationship on an ongoing basis? Joshua Walker just previously talked about the myriad of ways that the Japan-American Society and civil societies were involved in the post-March 11th world. So I'm wondering, can you first identify for us, from your perspective, what the lessons learned are, and also just give us a sense of your insights on the role of nonprofit or non-governmental organizations? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Paige. Great to see you, our friends, on this program. Thank you for having me. You know, when this tsunami and earthquake happened, I think everybody in Japan and the United States were shocked in a way. But the most important part of my memory is that the United States was the most first supporters. They came around, not only the military government, but also all the American people were extending the help. And that was great. And this is the, I would say, outcome of the long-standing history of the friendship on the grassroots. When I say grassroots, it includes not only the Japan-American societies and Japan-US Council and Carl Corns and Mansfield Foundations. Frank is on the program, and a lot of think tanks like ours and so forth. And these people are not really partisan. They are bipartisan supporters of the friendship. And this friendship was reconfirmed by the Tomodachi operations on the days following the disaster. And also all these Tomodachi programs carried on, just, you and Caroline were talking about. The younger generation, came around. And when I was ambassador to the United States, I mean, these younger people, high school students, like Ryota just has said it, came over and showed how they were coming back. And I'm glad to see him speaking. Now he's doing great and working in his hometown. I mean, and so these are the basis of friendship. So I would say that when we talk about, all these transitions of the government, it is true that there is always some adjustment of the thought, but we are always confident that there is enormous bipartisan support. That is based upon all these people-to-people exchanges. And I'm glad to see that today, and this will continue to grow.
Thank you for that. And there are indeed young people in Japan and the United States who have a thirst and appetite to experience each other's countries. And I also recognize that in Japan, there's a growing and maturing nonprofit and NPO community. And I'm just wondering, what kind of opportunities do you think exist in Japan now for people who maybe want to pursue a career in that type of work when previously, 10 years ago, it may not have been attractive? Would you encourage Japan's youth to pursue a career in the role of civil society?
When we talk about the younger generation, often the case, we tend to say that, well, these days younger people are not really, looking outside, looking inward, and try to stay at home. But when we talk to the younger generation, like Ryotaro, who just appeared on the program, these people, after suffering from all this, disaster and loss of the people, and came back, and these people need to be supported. I mean, and private institutions, obviously, and I think tanks and academic institutions and the government need to increase their program, budget program. Of course, they need to spend for the welfare and the college education, the military, and all the program. But I think if we are continue to build the nations and foster the friendship between Japan and the United States, obviously all these different kind of the program need to be supported by the government and also a larger audience. And for that, I'm confident.
Thank you.
Ambassador Schieffer, it's so nice to see you, and it's so great. I feel very proud to be a part of this program. We were speaking a moment ago, Ambassador Sasai mentioned the nonpartisan and bipartisan support that exists within the United States for the US-Japan relationship. I think no ambassador better embodied that than Ambassador Mike Mansfield, who also famously remarked that the US-Japan relationship was the most important bilateral relationship in the world for the United States, bar none. You have been reflecting upon how the events of 3/11 tested that relationship, and rather than breaking it, reaffirmed the strength of it, but also displayed some of the differences in the capabilities of the US and Japan, and how we complement each other. And I was wondering if I could ask you to elaborate upon your observations about how 3/11 revealed for you some of the complementarity of our alliance, and what that means looking forward into what the US and Japan can do together in the world, as Prime Minister Abe said, in our alliance of hope.
Well, thank you, Frank. I thought the most beneficial thing that came out of the tragedy of 3/11 was the appreciation, the great appreciation that the Japanese people showed for the help that came out of the United States. When you saw United States Marines in Tohoku, and they were getting people water and food and trying to take care of the most basic needs, you could see in the eyes and the faces of the Japanese people a gratitude and an appreciation. I hope it wasn't a surprise. I don't think it was, but I think it was a realization that having the United States as an ally can be a very important thing at a time of tragedy like we had on 3/11. And the United States was able to help in a way that I thought was emblematic of what we can do in the world. There is no country that has a greater lift capacity than the United States does. And we have that for a reason. It's because we have projected force all over the world, and we have to have the ability to take a very heavy military presence and transport it to a different place. The Japanese, on the other hand, do not have a great lift capacity because of the restrictions in their constitution. They're not used to projecting power into foreign places. But what the Japanese do have is probably the best rescue experience and operation in the world. And what you could see in the aftermath of 3/11 was the complementary nature of those two things coming together in a very positive way. You could have Americans moving Japanese pieces. You could have rescue operations that grow out really of the Japanese experience with earthquakes and tsunamis and natural disasters. So you really have to think about in the future a United States and a Japan that can have a dramatic impact on the rest of the world by putting those two things of a lift capacity and a rescue capacity together that really is cannot be equaled anywhere else in the world.
Well, I thank you for that observation, Ambassador, and it reminds me of the time when, as Senator, Joe Biden worked to try to ensure that American C-5 heavy airlift capacity was made available to Japan to carry search and rescue dog teams to earthquake victims in Taiwan. And I think it exemplifies what the US and Japan can do together in the world, and especially in times of budget austerity and when every country is seeking ways to be efficient in meeting its international and domestic obligations. There's much to recommend the complementarity between the US and Japan. The response to 3/11, of course, was not only at the national level. We've already touched upon the role of NGOs and civil society leaders, but Ambassador Sugiyama, you were famous during your tenure in the United States as ambassador for being an ambassador who understood America beyond the Beltway and who understood the importance of states and municipalities to handling international contact, including the US-Japan relationship. And I was wondering if you might, based on your travels even around all 50 states, reflect for a moment upon the special role of states, municipalities, and subnational government entities in responding to the 3/11 quake and also in strengthening the overall fabric of the US-Japan relationship.
Well, thank you, Frank, for your nice introduction about myself, and Paige and Caroline and Sasai-san and Tom. I really feel honored to be a part of this program immediately after March 11, 10 years. Let me start by saying what was doing at 14:46 p.m. on that day. When the earthquake struck in Tokyo, I happened to be in a meeting with then U.S. Embassy's DCM Ambassador Zumwalt. And then I was Assistant Minister, Director General of the ASEAN and Oceanic Affairs Bureau at the time. I seemed like the tremors went on forever. Actually, immediately I did was to naturally call my late wife Yoko at my apartment house to find out that she was all right. But 60 seconds after I tried to reach her, the cell phone didn't work. Of course, after the initial shock of it all, Ambassador Zumwalt and I were soon to agree how to coordinate US support in response to the crisis. Well, first, we didn't anticipate that that crisis was that much, but when we just went out to the street, people just went out from the building, and then that's what started everything. Such immediate connections happening between Japan and US colleagues at various levels and capacities of government, in particular the then US Ambassador Lutz, and soon much more was going on beyond efforts at the national level. As Frank was kindly mentioning, when I was ambassador to the US, I decided to not only to stay in inside belt of capital, which is quite important for, of course, all the ambassadors, but also to try to cover all the 50 states, which was not able to take part because primarily the pandemic, COVID-19. I only was able to cover slightly less than 40 or so, but nonetheless, I went to quite a number of local municipalities. And then I saw Japanese direct investment in business, but that was not only business investment. Of course, it is business, but these Japanese direct investment in business have become not only a business kind of a partnership, but they seem to become indispensable part of US economy, not only US economy, but US social life. Even not a good neighbors, more than that, to be indispensable part of US society, which I am very much proud that their industry people and their business people have been making tremendous efforts over the past 3 decades or 4 decades or something, about which I'm very much, proud. I think this has given us a foundation of the grassroots exchange, which have become very, very deep-rooted. That made the current US-Japan situation seems to be something which couldn't be better. Of course, we have to go on further, but when I was ambassador for slightly less than 3 years or something, presumably I was maybe Sasai-san and other ambassadors might feel the same thing, but at least as far as I'm concerned, I have felt that I am the happiest ambassador ever been sent from anywhere, including Tokyo. Everybody was welcoming Japan. Everybody was very much welcoming me, and that was very good. But I think this was already there. But I think this March 11 thing, Tomodachi Corporation, whatever, which was taking place back in 2011, this grassroots relationship, of course, already strong, but this made things even more deep-rooted and very much solidly founded. So it is in that sense that while I'm being very much deeply thankful for the Japanese industry people and Japanese people about what they have done in its whole US 50 states, but at the same time, Ambassador Roos and everybody, and then of course Japanese side did this Tomodachi Corporation, whatever, in addressing this disaster of March 11, did make a further foundation of grassroots, a very good relation between the US and Japan. These, as I said, they say, the direct investment, something, but I'm told that these things become number one, even exceeding those of the numbers of the United Kingdom some 2 years ago or something.
Ambassador,
yeah,
you have underscored for us the importance of the private sector in helping to strengthen this relationship, and I've witnessed that, and I'm even a beneficiary of it. Like our host this evening, Laura Abbott, I also was a Hitachi International Affairs Fellow who had the opportunity to deepen my understanding and appreciation for Japan, thanks to the investment made by Hitachi in people-to-people ties. And of course, in every community across the United States, we see that private sector investment. So I commend you for reminding us that our relationship is more than government to government, more than NGO to NGO, but also business to business and people to people.
That's right.
A very important reminder. Because time is short, we want to draw people's attention to those kinds of investments that have been made, private sector, NGOs, civil society, and to ask each of you about the future. And I'm going to turn it back to Paige for our lightning round question about future investment. Paige?
Thank you so much, Frank, and thank you all for reminding us about that important role of each of the various sectors of society. We would love for you to share with our audience, what one investment do you believe that our governments, our institutions should invest to assure that there's human capital to sustain and support the US-Japan relationship? So I'm going to ask you to be brief and just offer up one area where you think it would be beneficial to invest in human capital to support and sustain the US-Japan relationship.
Indeed, if I may say, my answer would be, as you rightly already mentioned, be investing in people-to-people exchange. it is an invaluable investment for our joint future. I think all of the relationship formed through the JET program, I think student exchange programs such as Kakehashi project, I think the Sister Cities programs and so on and so on. All other economic, local, grassroots relationship on top of the business investment. They are like glue that binds us together. But I think everything has been done in the right way. And we've reached the point that, as I said, maybe the situation which couldn't be better. And yet, I do believe that we must go forward. And then the diplomats, must be in a position to help them doing further. And then there are some sort of, foundation to do that. So let's do that further.
Thank you, Ambassador.
To put that people to people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Kennedy, what's the one investment that you think would be critical?
Well, I think science and technology, but I would also love to see the U.S. military do more educational programs with the base hosting communities.
Thank you. And Ambassador Sasai?
Well, I think as President Joe Biden said, we need a power of examples. This 3/11 was a power of example manifested. Our alliance will continue to manifest this power of alliance and also power of power, strength. That's what we need in the future. For that.
Thank you so much. And Ambassador Schiefer, you're going to get the last word.
I think anytime that you invest in people and people to people, you get dividends for years. That's been the strength of our relationship over the last 60 years, frankly, is that we made investments in people and in early stages in their lives in which Japanese and Americans could grow up together in power and mature together. And I think that has paid huge dividends. And I think the more of that sort of thing that we can do, the better off both of our countries will be.
Thank you so much. Frank, I'm going to turn it over to you and suggest that we continue this conversation another time. There's so much more to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks to all of our distinguished ambassadors for sharing their wisdom with us. Of course, it's music to my ears to hear an endorsement in the investment of people to people. I think that people are the fabric that is woven together across the Pacific. It's the 10th anniversary of 3/11. It's also on a more positive note, the 25th anniversary of the dispatch of the first Mansfield Fellows to Japan. Now almost 200 alumni across the federal government that represent an investment by the United States and Japan in our relationship. And I think that we can look back upon Ambassador Mansfield with warmth for the program that bears his name, and look with kindness and respect to the 4 ambassadors who joined us this morning, who follow in his footsteps. It's my distinct pleasure now to introduce and turn over the program to our next speaker. After I thank Paige and everyone for this opportunity, our next speaker, Miyu Sugita, alumni of the Tomodachi Initiative from Sendai, who will share her personal story. Over to you, Miyu.
I was 11 years old in Sendai when the Great East Japan Earthquake hit some parts of Tohoku. I still remember that we spent every night with a lot of candles on the table, since utilities were out. A few weeks later, the newspaper finally came to us, and the picture of the terrible tsunami on the front page was a great shock to me. I just could not believe what was happening in the same prefecture. At the same time, what touched me was the picture of the US military helping those people in need immediately after the tsunami as Operation Tomodachi, which made me want to know more about the country. After 3 years, I spent a few weeks with my American host family in Dallas through the Tomodachi program supported by Japan-American Society of Dallas-Fort Worth. I always remember the times when my host sisters and I laughed at something together or enjoyed dancing together. And it was the first time when I was so attracted by the people-to-people communication beyond cultures. I still keep in touch with my host family, and I'm so happy that one of my host sisters is now studying abroad in Tokyo. After I entered university in Japan, I was majoring in international relations, but I wanted to learn art and design too. Then I remember the story that one of my Tomodachi mentors, whom I had met at Tomodachi Alumni Program, once told me. I recalled when she told me how her experience of studying art in a college overseas was inspiring and enjoyable to her. Then I realized my desire of wanting to explore much deeper in art had been coming from inside me. Without hesitation, I decided to go study art in Maryland for 2 years, which now I think came out as a life-changing and valuable experience for me. While I'm in the US, I came to think, is there anything that I can do as a Japanese? I look back at my experience in Dallas when I was struck by how my host family got interested in Japanese culture. Then I started working as an intern at Japan American Society of Washington, D.C. Last month, I virtually visited an elementary school in Virginia to give presentations surrounding Japanese culture. I was so happy to see kids getting interested in and curious about the cultural differences and asking me so many questions. After a week, when I get a lot of thank you messages and drawings of what the kids learned from my presentation, not only was I exceptionally happy about the letters and pictures, but I also realized again how much the people-to-people interactions across borders are precious and important. From next month, I'm going to study in Tokyo and learn international relations from many aspects, especially art. Now I'm able to learn what I'm eager to learn every day because I encounter so many stunning and influential people, including my host family, mentors, supporters, and staff who made our programs possible. 10 years ago, I did not expect anything happy and fortunate about my future when I was experiencing the earthquake. But after that, so many people inspired, encouraged, and supported me, and I would like to give back to improve the interactions between various cultures at the grassroots level. Thank you.
Thank you, Miyu, for sharing your story. And thanks for all the ways that you are deepening people-to-people ties between the United States and Japan. We're very fortunate today to be bringing together speakers from across generations, each of whom has been so dedicated to strengthening US-Japan connections. Our final two speakers are Ryozo Kato, who served as the Japanese ambassador to the United States from 2001 to 2008, as well as US Senator William Hagerty, who served as US ambassador to Japan from 2017 to 2019. Now let's hear from Ambassador Kato.
Good evening, everybody. I am Ryozo Kato. Since my first name is a bit difficult to pronounce, some friends call me Risotto Kato, or more precisely, Risotto Minor Kato. That is quite fine with me. 10 years after the Great Eastern Earthquake in Japan, we are all in the midst of the combat against the COVID-19. At any crucial critical times, one important thing for us is to differentiate, one, what has changed from what has not changed, and two, what will change from what should not change, and three, what is essential from what is not essential. Under the circumstances where people tend to become aggressive, intolerant, and vociferous, the spirit of good gardenership will be needed more than ever. Here the gardener is a figuration of those who work day and night quietly to keep the garden clean and beautiful before spectators turn out, while not seeking any limelight nor having any affection for microphones for themselves. Professionals who recognize the importance of the passion for anonymity. I commend the US-Japan Council for its great achievements up to today for laying out the ground for nurturing numerous good gardeners. And I wish all the members, friends, and sponsors of US-Japan Council continued success in each and all of your present and future undertakings. Thank you very much.
Today marks 10 years since the horrible earthquake that forever changed and took the lives of so many people throughout Japan. Despite the time that's passed, March 11th of 2011 remains a memory that's seared in our hearts and minds. On this day, your tomodachi, your friends here in America, are thinking of you. As former U.S. ambassador to Japan, I had the opportunity to visit communities that were indelibly marked by that tragic day. But I also got to see firsthand the progress, the resilience, and the incredible spirit of your nation, and the powerful love shared between both our citizens through the Tomodachi Initiative. I thank Ambassador John Roos for his leadership, establishing Operation Tomodachi. The United States alliance with Japan is the cornerstone of peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region, and you have no bigger friend than me in the United States Senate. I look forward as we go forth together to solve the most important issues and challenges ahead. God bless you.
Thank you, Ambassadors Kato and Haggerty. I'm Suzanne Basala, President and CEO of the U.S.-Japan Council. On behalf of the Council, as well as our many partners supporting today's event, I thank you for joining us. Our program provided us an opportunity to remember. We honor the memory of lives lost and forever disrupted by the tragic events of March 11th. We also remember our individual experiences on that day and in the aftermath. This event also allowed us to reconnect. Hearing from the diverse speakers reminds us of the vast community that came together to support Japan 10 years ago, and the partnerships and friendships that were formed in the crucible of 3/11. We've also had an opportunity to reflect. As individuals and as leaders and members of organizations, we have contributed to Tohoku and Japan's long-term recovery, and done so in a way that has fostered a more vibrant NPO sector, launched a Tomodachi generation, strengthened our military alliance, solidified the friendship between our two nations, and cultivated new partnerships. There is more work ahead. We must continue to support the communities of Tohoku. We must address new challenges that threaten our future, whether that's related to the ongoing pandemic or dealing with global climate change. One thing we know for certain that we must do is continue to empower the next generation of leaders. And finally, today's program has given us the space to recommit. We know what can be achieved through the resilience of our friendship, the strength of our two nations working together, and the power of our people-to-people connections. Personally and on behalf of our organizations, let us all take this time to imagine a better world and then work together to realize that future. In our closing video, we showcase many of the U.S.-Japan grassroots organizations throughout the country as they offer their encouragement on this occasion. Thank you.
On behalf of the many American organizations dedicated to the friendship between Japan and the United States, I would like to express my thoughts and prayers to our many friends, colleagues, and families in Japan on the 10th anniversary of March 11, 2011. We will never forget.
We remember.
忘れません。
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 Kisuna always.
We remember. 忘れません。
We remember.
忘れません。
忘れません。
Hello from Dallas. We remember.
忘れません。
忘れません。
これからも忘れません。
忘れません。